Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling something I think a lot of us have thought about, but maybe not really deeply explored. And that's the role of digital technology during the COVID-19 lockdown.
Hmm.
We all lived through it, but it's interesting to step back now and really analyze how much tech shaped our experiences, both the good and the bad.
Right. It's kind of like we were all part of this giant experiment.
Totally. And to help us dissect this, we've got this great document from Digi-Tech Debates, which is a segment of Project Plain Talk. Have you had a chance to check that out?
Oh, yeah. I dug into it. Pretty fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it's really thought-provoking. And right off the bat, it poses this question. Was digital technology our saving grace during lockdown, or did it actually make things tougher?
The million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, it's clear that we couldn't have gotten through it without technology.
Right, like Zoom calls and online grocery shopping. I mean, that kept so many of us going.
But on the other hand, there's the whole issue of screen fatigue, the erosion of privacy, the spread of misinformation. So it's not all black and white.
Exactly. And that's what makes this document so compelling. It dives into both sides of the equation. So let's start with positives. The document kicks off with this idea that necessity is the mother of invention, which feels so true for this period, right?
Absolutely. The pandemic basically forced us to innovate and adopt new solutions at warp speed.
Like it fast-forwarded technological adoption by years in some cases.
Yeah, things that might have taken decades to become mainstream were suddenly happening overnight because we had no other choice.
Right. Like think about remote work. For so many people, that was a completely foreign concept before March 2020.
And then suddenly everyone's figuring out Zoom and setting up home offices.
It was like this mass migration to the distributed workplace. And this document does a great job of exploring how that impacted us, not just the practicalities of it, but the deeper implications too.
Yeah, like did it actually make us more productive? Or did it just blur the lines between work and life even further?
And how did it affect our mental health? Being constantly connected. These are all questions the document digs into.
It's like we had to figure out a whole new way of working practically on the fly.
Yeah.
And we're still grappling with the consequences of that.
Totally. And it wasn't just the workplace that transformed education. It went through a huge upheaval, too. I mean, overnight schools had to go virtual.
Yeah.
And this document talks about how teachers and students alike had to adapt to this whole new world of online learning.
Right. It wasn't just about mastering the tech. It was about rethinking how we teach and learn.
Exactly. The document breaks down the different approaches to virtual schooling, like synchronous learning, where everyone's online at the same time, versus asynchronous learning, which gives more flexibility.
And what I found fascinating was how this forced educators to think outside the box and leverage all sorts of online resources.
Yeah, suddenly we had virtual museum tours, online libraries, and even the Smithsonian releasing millions of images for anyone to use.
It was amazing how much was suddenly available online. And it made me realize the potential for technology to make learning more accessible, even beyond a crisis situation.
Did you have a favorite online resource that you discovered during lockdown? I know I spent hours getting lost in those virtual museum tours.
Oh, me too. It was like being able to travel the world from my couch.
Right. But the document also raises some important questions about the digital divide. Not everyone has the same access to technology and the internet. So how do we ensure that everyone has an equal opportunity to learn?
That's the huge challenge. And it's something that was really brought to the forefront during the pandemic.
Because those without access were essentially cut off from education, healthcare, and even just staying connected with loved ones.
It highlighted how essential internet access is in today's world. And the document even goes so far as to argue for it being considered a basic human right.
Which is a pretty radical idea, but one that I think deserves serious consideration. And speaking of education, the document also delves into how the pandemic impacted college admissions with the rise of this test-optional movement.
Right, because suddenly standardized tests weren't feasible for everyone. So colleges had to adapt their admissions criteria.
It makes you wonder if those tests are even a fair measure of ability in the first place, especially when access to resources and opportunities is so uneven.
Yeah, it's a debate that's been going on for a long time, but the pandemic really brought it to a head.
And then there's healthcare. Telemedicine just exploded during lockdown. It felt like everyone was suddenly having virtual doctor's appointments.
It was out of necessity at first, but the document explores how this shift actually has the potential to improve healthcare access in the long term.
Especially for people in rural areas or those who face barriers to traditional healthcare.
Exactly. It's not just about convenience. It's about reaching those who need care the most. But of course, it also raises questions about data privacy and security when it comes to sensitive health information.
Right. It's like every solution comes with its own set of challenges. And this document does a great job of highlighting those nuances.
Like it even mentions how social media was used to track disease outbreaks and how scientists were sharing coronavirus genomes in open access databases to speed up research.
It's really amazing how much we were able to accomplish through technology during that time. But it wasn't all work, education, and healthcare. Technology also played a huge role in how we stayed informed and entertained during those long months of lockdown.
Oh, yeah. We were all glued to our screens for news updates and for connecting with friends and family.
And let's not forget about the explosion of streaming services. We all had our favorite shows to binge watch. But the document points out that it wasn't just about mindless entertainment. These platforms provided a vital connection to the outside world and helped combat isolation.
Right. It was a way to escape the confines of our homes and to feel like we were still part of something bigger.
And even the World Health Organization got on board with the whole gaming thing, supporting the hashtag Play Apart Together initiative. It was like they were acknowledging the positive role that video games could play in helping people cope with lockdown.
It's definitely a sign of the times. And it shows how our understanding of technology and its role in our lives is constantly evolving.
It's amazing how much ground we've covered already. We've talked about remote work, virtual education, telemedicine, online entertainment, and even global scientific collaboration. It paints a pretty clear picture of how technology helped us through a really challenging time.
It does. But as we mentioned earlier, there's another side to this story. The document also explored the ways in which technology might have hindered us during lockdown.
That's right.
Technology was this lifeline for so many of us during the lockdown. But, like we said, there's another side to that story. And this document calls it out pretty bluntly. Technology is hindering. Kind of makes you stop and think, huh. Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in all the cool things technology can do. But we can't ignore the potential downsides, especially when it comes to something as disruptive as a global pandemic.
Right. And one of the first things the document jumps into is this whole issue of loss of privacy. With all the contact tracing apps, virtual meetings, online shopping, it felt like our every move was being tracked.
It was to some extent. I mean, think about all the data that companies and governments were collecting about our movements, our health, our online activity.
It felt like the lines between public safety and individual privacy got really blurry. And the document raises some tough questions about whether those increased surveillance measures would become permanent even after the pandemic subsided.
Like, did we trade away some of our freedoms in the name of safety? And if so, was it a price worth paying?
It's a debate that's still going on today, and it's one that we need to be having, because once those systems are in place, it's hard to roll them back.
Exactly. And then there's the whole issue of the infodemic, which the document describes as this flood of misinformation, conspiracy theories, and just plain bad information that was spreading like wildfire online.
Oh man, it was crazy. It felt like every time you logged onto social media, there was some new outrageous claim circulating, and people were sharing it without even questioning it.
The document actually cites an MIT study that found that misinformation spread 6 times faster than truth online,
Mm-hmm.
which is pretty terrifying when you think about it.
It really is. And it makes you wonder if we're just becoming more gullible or if it's just harder to separate fact from fiction in the digital age.
It's probably a combination of both. I mean, we're bombarded with so much information from so many different sources that it's hard to know what to believe.
And it wasn't just adults who were susceptible to this infodemic. The document talks about the risks to kids, especially with online learning becoming the norm. I mean, there were concerns about cyberbullying, exposure to inappropriate content, even online predators.
Right, because suddenly kids were spending hours online every day for school, for socializing, for entertainment.
It was like parents had to become cybersecurity experts overnight. And the document doesn't shy away from the darker side of things either, like online harassment and the stigmatization of people who got sick with COVID.
Yeah, remember how some people were being harassed or even doxxed, which means having their personal information shared online as a form of attack?
It was awful. And it's a reminder that technology can be used for good or for evil. It all depends on the intentions of the people using it.
And unfortunately, there are always going to be people who exploit technology for their own gain or to harm others.
Which brings us to another big issue that the document highlights, the digital divide. The fact that not everyone has equal access to technology and the internet.